Bienvenue tout le monde. On va commencer déjà parce qu'on a 4 présentateurs et des sujets passionnants à découvrir. I'm going to give the mic to Anne, who's going to do a little introduction. Remember, if you want certificates of participation, take a screenshot and email it to staff@frenchteachers.org. And that was at the bottom of the invitation, if you forget. Okay, Anne?
Okay. One of the reasons we decided to have this particular workshop today was because during the month of May and June, when many of the events happened throughout the United States having to do with Black Lives Matters and so forth, we formed a diversity task force in AATF. And we came up with a diversity statement, which is on all of our publications and documents. And in the September bulletin, which you should be receiving fairly soon, I've written an article about the importance of teaching for diversity and what it means to have a diverse association. And both Tracy and Tiffany are part of the task force. And it's something that I think is really important for our association to think about and for members of AATF to think about. So I'm very, very pleased to introduce you to Tiffany Jones, a teacher in Washington, DC, who is going to start off our diversity workshop today and present her views about teaching for diversity. So I'm going to turn it over to Tiffany, and she's going to share her screen.
Bonjour à toutes et à tous. So I'm going to present this morning in English, first of all, because it's been a very, very long week for me. And we're going to talk about intentional unit design for diversity. It's my general practice that when designing anything for teaching, if you start with some design principles, you'll carry those principles throughout your entire work. Okay, so one of my principles for classroom instruction is whoever does the doing does the learning. So I'm very intentional about making sure that my students are doing activities throughout the class to make sure that they're showing what they're learning. And that design principle has served me very well and served my students. So when it comes to diversity, I've developed another design principle that I use as I'm designing thematic units, and this will even work for those of you if you're using a more TPRS approach or a fully comprehensible input approach. Many of the strategies that I'm going to talk about today will also apply to those methods of teaching as well. So as I think about diverse instruction and designing for diversity, I want to talk about these 3 principles today. How we're going to think 3, the francophonie, how representation matters and we need to normalize the autrui, so to speak. And then finally, how can we avoid some of the barriers to success? First, as we all know, la francophonie consists of regions that are around the entire world. And I like to think of it as les Antilles et le Guyane, here in les Amériques, the Québec. Then I also split up Africa into le Maghreb, l'Afrique occidentale, et l'Afrique de l'Est, looking at Madagascar, La Réunion, looking at Europe as a whole, so not just l'Hexagone, but also la Suisse, la Belgique, and other European French-speaking countries. And then, of course, not leaving out Asie and la Polynésie française. When I'm designing a unit, I like to do my best to think about how can I triangulate my unit? How can I use or have resources from cultures spanning at least 3 different regions within the French-speaking world? So if I'm putting together a unit and maybe in my textbook I have main sources from France, then I'm thinking, well, what materials can I supplement or what can I go find to represent the same topic in Les Amériques, in one of my American regions, or in Asia, or in one of my African regions, so that I can show my students that French truly is a global language and that we're going around the world. I find this to be a much more effective way of presenting La Francophonie than maybe doing the country project, which I'm sure most of us has done. I'm guilty, I've done it. used to do it, and it just wasn't very effective. The students learned all about their one country. They did that at the beginning of the year, and then by the end of the year, not so much. And I know we also love to maybe pull up a cultural celebration that happens in one of the regions at that time of the year. You do this great big blowout on it, but then later on, maybe some of the kids remember if they liked it and maybe they don't. But I have found that when I weave the concepts throughout different units, it really validates all of the cultures within La Francophonie and gives each of these cultures their own time to shine. So here are some of the units that I've put together. I'll just discuss them briefly. One for my advanced classes. So I teach all levels. I have level 1, I've done level 2, 3, 4. The Baccalaureate International program, I do the language BSL. And then, of course, AP French, which I haven't done in a while, so I'm not completely up to verse in the new AP themes that might not be so new now. But I have a unit on le tatouage, or l'art du corps. And so I start with what the students are familiar with, which is tattooing here in the Western world. So we look at the practice of tattooing in France and why people get tattoos. So when to link to the International Baccalaureate program, looking at identities and human ingenuity. And so looking at the art of tattooing and how people decide what tattoos they want to get and how it's kind of a very individualistic experience in France, in the Western world. But then we look at the Berber people of the Maghreb. And we look at this ancient practice of tattooing in their culture, of tattooing on the face, and how it's actually dying out in their cultures as younger generations don't want to continue to practice. But the tattooing was not a symbol of individualism, but rather a symbol of group identity. To triangulate this concept of body art and group identity, I then looked at practices of scarification in some Western African countries. I believe the article I have is from Benin. And so through looking at a practice of body art in 3 different contexts across 3 different regions of the French-speaking world, the students are able to make cultural comparisons. Okay, and they're able to put all 3 cultures on an equal footing, which is, for me, very important, that when we include diversity in our classes and we look at different regions of the French-speaking world, that we're not setting up a hierarchy of sense, but that we are really validating all of the cultures and the different practices, or that we are at least presenting them as equal practices to be looked at and studied and thought about critically. Now, this unit, you might be like, whoa, that's a little deep. That's for older students. I'm teaching younger students. What about French 1? What can we do in our levels 1 and 2 class? Well, for my level 1 students, I have a unit on Carnaval. And so we start by looking at Carnaval in the Antilles. So here I have a picture from Martinique. And we look at Carnaval practices in Martinique. Then we look at Carnaval de Nice. And finally, we also look at Carnaval de Quebec. The stratification here allows me to work on not only different verbs, the verb faire, and verbs of activity and what people are doing and continuing on with the present tense. It also lends itself to speaking about weather and clothing and what we're going to wear, and we're going to pack our suitcase and we want to go to Carnival. Which Carnival do you want to go to and why? Do you like cold weather or hot weather? Do you want more a Mediterranean climate? And well, what do you need to pack in your suitcase if you're going to, Carnaval de Quebec versus Carnaval de Nice or Carnaval en Martinique? And this really allows us to look at schedules, and it just pulls in all of those French 1 concepts and topics and themes that you want to go over. But I can do it by looking at 3 different regions of the French-speaking world and making comparisons, again, on an equal footing among them. So you might be thinking right now, that's a lot of work. It can be a lot of work. My tips for success on this is first, work with what you have, all right, and evaluate what you have. So maybe your textbook or material series has information on one or two regions in the French-speaking world in the topic that you're looking at. Maybe you only need to add in one. Okay, you might think of, well, I don't really know a lot that's going on. I had that same issue. And I realized that several years ago that I was teaching a lot of France because I studied abroad in France, and France was what I knew. And when I traveled to Quebec, thanks to the AATF having our conference in Quebec, I was able to do a lot more travel and really fell in love with Quebec, and I started adding more Quebec. And then I went to Côte d'Ivoire and started adding that, and went to Martinique. So I know everyone's travel budget may not be extensive. However, we are lifelong learners as teachers, and I think that the first thing you have to do is notice where the gaps are in your curriculum, notice where you can add more, and then focus on finding that. As you read, as you engage yourself with the French-speaking world, if you're not looking for something, you're not going to find it. So once you decide that you're going to look for it, then you'll start seeing that you might start finding it more and more. Some of the resources you're already using, such as TV5 Monde and Radio France Internationale, they do have some diverse videos and topics on them. And I know some of my colleagues today after me are going to be presenting as well on some diverse topics and videos and materials that you can use in your classes. So I just encourage everyone that this is a design principle that you can still aspire to. But I have something else that you can do very easily and really quickly. Our second principle of design for diversity is that representation matters. Representation matters. One of the simplest things that we can all do in our classrooms on Monday is something as simple as using non-European names in teacher-created activities. I make it a point to use names such as Mamadou, Jamel, Karim, Layla, Yasmin in activities that I create or model sentences that I say. It doesn't always have to be Marie and Pierre and Paul and Jean. We can use other names. And it seems simple, but sometimes something as simple as that can help you connect with your students, especially if you teach mostly brown and black students, which I do. Immediately they can start to see themselves in the language and in the language class, and that this is a language that they can learn and learn to speak. I also usually have my students, I say usually because this year is weird being all online, so I'm just trying to still learn their actual names, but usually I also have my students choose a French name. And if the student's given name is Darion, it's kind of hard for them to go from a name, a beautifully creative name like Darion to Jean. And so I try to make sure that they have a list of diverse names from around the French-speaking world to choose from. And sometimes it's like, you know what, you really are a Jamel. Like your name is now Jamel because that really fits you. And it helps them become more involved and more engaged in my class. Another thing that we can all do quite easily is use images and examples that show diverse individuals doing normal things. So yes, you all have your cultural pictures of people in their cultural dress, but you can also show diverse people just sitting down and eating dinner. So we have the family Christmas scene up top. I love this image because it shows we can interpret this image in a lot of different ways. We can have a multi-racial family. We could have we don't know if this is a homosexual couple and with their extended family. There's just a lot of ways to interpret the picture, and students can be allowed to make all of those interpretations just by giving them an image that lends itself to more than just the one interpretation. I really like pictures where there are men taking care of children, where you just see families just interacting. If you need people watching TV or working, you can use other pictures. You can use pictures that represent the diversity that's in your classroom and the diversity within the French-speaking world. Later, when I'm not speaking and presenting, I'm going to throw some websites in the chat that you can use to go find some stock photos that one of my department members at my school found over the summer. They have wonderful free photos that you can use. There's a site with photos from Africa, and other sites that have just a variety of photos that can be used. So something as simple as names and images can be extremely important to your students, just seeing themselves in your work. And finally, a few pitfalls that we can avoid. The first is beware of stereotypes. Right? We want to avoid showing only positive or negative elements of any society or culture, because the reality is everybody in Africa is not starving. So we want to make sure that we have full depictions as best as we're able to of people and cultures from around the world. And just as all people in Africa are not starving, all Europeans are not racist, right? And all Europeans are not white. Like we do have to make I think as language teachers and teachers of culture, we need to be aware of those things. Of, am I only showing one side of a particular culture or region? And to think about that and make sure that we try and do our best to infuse our classes with multiple representations of all peoples. Avoid tokenism. So a lot of the times we can just kind of mention diversity, like, oh, I'm going to have my diversity day. I'm going to teach all about Algeria on this one day, and it's going to be great. And then I'm not going to do anything for the rest of the year because that was Algeria Day and now it's over. Or, oh, it's Black History Month, so we'll do Senegal today because it's Black History Month and I need to do something for Black History Month. Well, that has a tendency to position diversity as something you only need to do at a certain period of time, and that's it. And it doesn't need to actually permeate your entire course. So that's why I like the idea of the triangulation and trying to look at 3 different cultures within a unit so that I don't fall into the trap of just picking a day and doing this one thing, but that I can show my students that this diversity exists all the time and should be validated throughout the year and throughout each unit. And then finally, know your audience. You need to, as any good teacher would do, develop and maintain relationships both within and outside of your community. Just a few lessons this year, I found out that I have students whose families are from Morocco, whose families are from different islands in the Caribbean, who have Haitian ancestry, and some of these things I would have never found out if I didn't start asking questions and get to know more about my students and allow them the opportunity to tell me things about themselves. And now it's making me think, okay, I have a student whose family's from Morocco. One, I need to talk to them and ask them questions and what can they bring into the class? And 2, where is this student going to see himself in my class? Where is he going to see himself in my class, and what are the depictions of Morocco that are going to be visible within the class? Because he should see himself, but he should also see positive representations of his home culture as well. So that is generally my talk today. I do hope that you found it informative. Again, my name is Tiffany Jones. I teach French of all levels at Benjamin Banneker Academic High School here in Washington, D.C. And you can follow me on Twitter at Ms. Tiffany Jones. And I'd be glad to answer any questions if there are any questions in the chat, which I cannot see, so I'll be dependent on my colleagues to let me know if there's any questions in the chat or if there is anyone who'd like to ask a question at this time.
Tiffany, someone asked to make sure that you put in those links with the names.
Yes.
Just a reminder.
I will definitely put in the links for the pictures, and I do actually have a link for it's a link to a blog of top names around the world, actually. I had my students use it, so I'll go find that and put that in the chat too. So photos and names, I will definitely do that.
Tiffany, how much time do you spend doing research on all these different topics? I'm sure teachers would like to know how much time this is going to entail.
That's a very, very good question. I think of it as just a continual process. So the unit might start out, honestly, like let's talk about the development of the tattooing unit. It started out as just tattoos, like just tattoos in France. And then I came across a picture of a woman with tattoos on her face and bare, and then I did some research on that and pulled some videos and things on that end. The internet is really cool. It does take time, as everyone knows, but I don't think of it as you need to have the perfect unit before you start teaching it.
Right.
Think of it as, okay, what do I have? I'm going to start there. Let me find a second culture and then build materials for it. And sometimes it might mean that the main unit is pretty beefed up, and then you just add in one text from one culture and one text from another culture until the following year you get another text or a video. The following year you get more and more as you continue to look for those things to add into your course. For those of you with a set curriculum, it's much easier because you know you're going to continue teaching that set curriculum every year. And so now that you're looking for it, you start seeing more. Once I started looking for it, the more I was reading the French Review and different publications, the more I saw things that, oh, I can use that for class. I need to save that. I need to bookmark that. So it does take time, but I don't think of it as I'm sitting down and developing this whole unit at once, but more as a continual process.
Thank you. I'm seeing in the chat, somebody asked, what are your thoughts on an all-school diversity day?
An all-school diversity day. I'm not sure about the context that would be in. I will say that my school generally produces what we call International Night. I don't know how we're going to do it this year, but we do some type of International Night, International Festival. And the idea of it is actually all of the families that are at our school to be able to highlight their own home culture. So students prepare performances from their home culture. So usually the Ethiopian students want to put together a dance. Our Nigerian students usually do some type of dance. There's poems and all types of stuff. It's all student produced. And then the pièce de résistance, what everybody's really coming for, is the food. Because everybody brings food dishes from all of their different cultures, and we have a big feast at the end. So I think anything that you want to do to validate your the diverse cultures within your school population would be great. Yes, I think that would be my response to that.
I see another one. Do you do activities for Black History Month or just try to make it an integral part of the class?
An integral part of the class. Everything is a part of the class. So it's Black history isn't something we do in February. It is history. It's 365. So throughout the year, every unit is about everybody.
I just want to piggyback on what Tiffany said. I also believe that including diverse topics throughout the whole school year is really the way to make a difference when you're teaching your students about diversity. And this particular unit was something that I developed for my AP classes at Gunn High School when I was teaching there. And obviously racism and tolerance is one of the AP themes, and my PowerPoint doesn't have a lot of pictures in it like Tiffany's does, because it includes links that I'm going to share with you of the different materials that I've created. So my unit is based around the essential question: what are the causes of discrimination in society, and what are the solutions? And this essential question is up on the screen every day when I'm in the class, and obviously it would be on my PowerPoints, because I want this to guide my instruction throughout the unit. My interpretive objectives are that I really want to immerse my students in authentic literary texts and website articles in which issues of racism in the Francophone world are discussed. Again, as Tiffany mentioned, I use a lot of authentic resources from all over the Francophone world and want students to realize that French is not just spoken in France, but it's spoken all over the world. I also introduce students to songs and video clips that deal with the issue of diversity as well. Those are my interpretive objectives. My interpersonal objectives is that I really want students to be able to discuss with their partners and in a small group experience that they themselves have had with racism and on how they can interpret the authentic resources that I've shared with them. My student body at Gunn was typically, there were 37 different languages spoken at Gunn. And so we had a very diverse population, and many of them were actually students or kids of recent immigrants. And so many of them had experienced discrimination themselves. I also asked them to write interpersonally on a class blog or on whatever discussion board platform that that your particular school uses, and answer questions dealing with the diversity. And my presentational objectives were that I wanted students to be able to create a graphic presentation based on the issue of racism and intolerance. And then I also wanted them to express orally something that would help them prepare for the AP exam, in which I asked them to compare racism in France and racism that they have noticed in the United States. So I started off the unit with, to set the context, many of you may know the author Azouz Begag. And in order for students to be able to read the excerpt of the novel, and here's the novel here that I had students read parts of, Azouz Begag is a very, very famous author in France. And here is a link to the PowerPoint that you will find in the presentation.
He was the AATF keynote speaker in
Yes.
2006.
Yes, exactly. And as you know, he's quite famous. I'm just going to go back here a little bit. He was born in France in 1957 in Bidonville, in a very, very poor area in France. He suffered discrimination when he went to elementary school. His parents were illiterate. They could not read or write. His older brother and sister were born in Algeria, but he was actually born in France. And most of his teachers in elementary school were French, white French people who hated their students. He was made fun of and had a terrible experience in elementary school. It wasn't until he got to high school where he was befriended by a teacher there who realized that he was really smart and encouraged him to go to university. He eventually got a doctorate, became a writer, a sociologist, got a PhD, and eventually in 1986 wrote this book called Le Gon du Shaba, which is the kid from a shantytown, which actually depicts his life growing up in very, very impoverished circumstances. And the book was made into a movie in 1997, and it actually won a prize at the Festival de Cannes. Here's Azouz Begag with the actors who played in the movie. And in the movie, Azouz's name is Omar, and here's little Omar. And the movie and the book are extremely touching. My students loved reading scenes from the novel. Here again are pictures from Les Bidonvilles. Here's Azouz Begag. And finally, him in his work for diversity. He actually was named the Ministre de l'Égalité des Chances by the government, and had a big battle with Sarkozy, obviously. So I decided that I would show my students part of the movie, and we would read excerpts of the novel because we didn't have time to read the entire novel. And so I've included the pages of the novel here that my questions are based on. And then I'd like to actually talk about the questions that I developed for this particular excerpt, which is entitled Une humiliation mémorable. Because this starts out with Madame Vallard, Azuz's teacher, accusing him of plagiarizing. Because when he was in elementary school, he heard a story that his elementary teacher told him, which was actually based on La Ficelle by Guy de Maupassant. And he didn't realize that this story was actually a famous story. And so he took this idea of somebody picking up a bit of string and being accused of stealing somebody's wallet and created it into his own little story. Well, Madame Vallard thinks, oh, Azuz has plagiarized, and she holds up his paper and gives him a 0 on his paper. And he feels very unjustly accused and is really mortified by the fact that his teacher would do this to him. And this is just typical of the way all the Arab students were treated during the time that they were going to school. And then in the story, there's actually questions about the story that Guy de Maupassant wrote. And finally, then the text goes on and talks about the fact that Azuz leaves elementary school. Most of his friends don't make it into collège or lycée, but he does. And he is befriended by a very important teacher in his life who encourages him to go to the university. But one of the first things that Monsieur Bon does is asks the class to write an essay on an open topic. And Azuz decides to write about racism. But for some reason, he has to be absent from school. And when he comes back, his best friend tells him that his essay was read to the class by the teacher. And Azuz can't understand why his essay would be read to the class. And he tells him, tu as eu la meilleure note de la classe. And Azuz is totally shocked by this. He can't believe it. And he ends this section by saying, "Je me sentais fort comme un buffle." I was as proud. I was very, very proud. And so, of course, he comes home and tells his father this. His father, who cannot read, marks an X on his paper. It's just a very, very moving passage. And you really see the pride of the family because they put all their hopes in Azuz to make it, because of course the father scraps away his life in this sort of garbage dump where they're living. And it's very, very well portrayed in the movie as well. One of the things that I do then with this excerpt is that I like to do readers theater with my students. And so I created a script actually where students enacted this story. And what happens is that I imagined the dialogue and the scene of the story that the students were reading. So here's the first little scene where Madame Vallard accuses Azuz of plagiat. And then this is actually the story that Azuz came up with about le vieil homme being accused of pickpocketing the clerc, okay? And the vieil homme says, "Vous me condamnez sur des soupçons, c'est pas juste," right? And then this is what I imagined Azuz's essay to involve, which is about a little boy coming to school. He's new to the school and he wants to play with another group of kids. And of course they won't play with him because he's not French, although he was born in France, but because he's Arab, he's called "Tu n'es pas français," right? Okay, and then he runs home to see his mother, okay? And finally, this is the scene where he shares with his father the fact that he got j'ai reçu un 17 sur 20. And he says to his papa, "Je me sens fort comme un buffle." Okay, and students loved, this involved a lot of different kids playing the different parts. And it really made them realize the impact that that Azuz's experience had on his life, and the fact that finally he got a good grade, and this inspired him to go to college and to really, be a voice for equality in France. The Ambassade de France actually created a wonderful document to study the film. And I found this online, and I used some of it when I was teaching this particular unit. So here it is. The film was directed by Christophe Rougiat. And it starts out with images of the film. Something about Azouz Begag. Here's the table of contents. Something about the reviews in the newspaper, a little biography of Azouz Begag, something about the director, a summary, a brief summary of the movie, and then the main characters. As I mentioned, Azouz becomes Omar in the film, his parents. And then here's again images, the different images that have been on the books. This is the one that I have here, but there have been many different publications of the book. And then there's interesting excerpts of dialogues from the film, which I used also with my classes. And there's one where he gets into a fight with another of his friends in the class who accuses him of not being Arab because he's doing well in school, and because in general the Arab kids didn't do well in school. And so Omar is constantly struggling with je suis français, je suis arabe. He wants to be part of both cultures, but because he's going to be educated, he needs to still be attached to his roots. And some of the kids who are Arab make fun of him because he actually gets good grades eventually. So, and this is the struggle that a lot of immigrant students have in terms of facing their own identities, this sort of double identité effect that happens. And there are many, many excerpts. There's Piste d'observation, the background about the novel, about the France colonizing Algeria. It's a very, very interesting document, and I highly recommend that you use it if you decide you want to teach Le Golem du Shabbat. My students really enjoyed it. Another task that I had students do was to explore the website of SOS Racisme, and you probably know about this organization. Which continually fights racism. It was formed in the 1980s. Here it is. I love their symbol, touche pas mon pote, hands off my buddy. Mm-hmm. And they are struggling against racism today, obviously. And in fact, here is SOS Racisme célèbre le 70e anniversaire de la Déclaration universelle des droits de l'homme. You click on this, and then it takes you to the celebration that's going on, the 70th anniversary of Déclaration universelle des droits de l'homme. Okay, and so I had students explore the website, fill in a graphic organizer about the history of the organization, what they're currently doing, and how this organization actually helps people who need help, who need legal help, because that's one of the things that they do actually. They give legal advice. And here's the different categories of things that they are working on in the organization: éducation, bouc émissaire dans l'histoire. There's a wealth of information here. And then I asked students to compare this to organizations in the United States that fight against racism. These are just some of the things that the organization has been involved in. Then I have the students actually watch a videotape of a song called Peur by a group that was very, very well known in the 1980s and 90s, Frederick Goldwyn and Jones. And what's interesting about this particular video is that the video has nothing to do with the lyrics of the song, which is true sometimes of music videos. So I have students watch the video, and then we look at the words, and they realize that the words to the video are very, very different from what they see in the actual video. And obviously the title Peur has to do with groups of people who are fearful of another group because of what they look like, what their gender is, what their race is, and what their religion is. And it's a really interesting commentary on who people are afraid of and why people are afraid. And I'd like to play the video right now so that you can see what I mean. It's pretty powerful because it deals with discrimination of race, of religion, sexism, different classes of people. My students were really amazed when we watched this video. Now, the words, however, to this song tell the story about a woman who's an immigrant who moves into an apartment, and people don't like her because her clothes are different. She doesn't talk to people. They're afraid of her because she looks different. So the story and the words are totally different from what the students see in the video. Okay, and so again, it's, oh, je l'ai trouvé vulgaire, pas coiffé. Okay, and then there's the refrain, peur contre peur, nous sommes d'ici, elle est ailleurs, as the idea. Okay, elle est partie un jour, on reste encore, nos peurs contre peur. Okay, and so why are they suspicious of her? Well, she doesn't look like them. People met her in the street, and what was she doing? And then there's this sense of, oh, c'est comme des animaux. She's probably from the colonies, right? Okay, and so what should we have done? He says, ici chacun, comme ça, c'est chacun pour soi. Okay, so this is repeated over and over again. Oh, on aime les serrures, pas les étrangers. We don't like strangers. We like the locks on our doors. All right. So this leads me to have a discussion with the students about de quoi avez-vous peur and de qui avez-vous peur? And they discuss with the partner. And then this is an analysis of actually the lyrics of the song. Okay. And then I asked them in a group to actually discuss what they saw in the video and why different people were afraid or made fun of the other person who entered into the elevator. Okay, and they came up with some really interesting observations because the video deals with almost every kind of discrimination that's out there. So I found it very, very useful to deal with this particular video. The other video that I have my students watch is by Abdel Al-Malik. It's called C'est Douleur, and it's about, he actually sings about the difficulties for his family and other immigrant communities who face discrimination. And in this particular video, the words do coincide with what they see in the video, and it also leads to really interesting discussions. And I think the time is going to allow us to be able to watch this video also. It's very moving. And here are the lyrics, and I'm going to, let's see, here are the lyrics to the song that you can click on and be able to read. Okay, and there are lines in this song I think that are absolutely amazing, particularly here. La France, elle est belle. La France, on l'aime. Okay, regarde tous ces beaux visages qui sont trop belles. Mais quand tu insultes le pays, ce pays, quand tu insultes ton pays, oui, okay, he really deals with the issues of who is French, why France needs to honor its diversity. And he also does criticize people because he uses the notion c'est du lourd, and then he says c'est pas du lourd with the people who are violent, who sell crack and so forth. So he's honest also about what has happened in the country. And so here are the questions that I actually created that accompany the song. And I asked my students, obviously, to talk about the title. What does it mean, c'est du lourd? Okay, and then I had them go through and I'll analyze the different people that are represented in the song and then asked them to answer questions about the different people that he mentioned, and particularly how he describes France and his country and what he wants for France. And then I asked them to discuss their reaction to the song, and then also to do some different presentations. Some of the kids actually did a slam or a rap, talking about their own experiences being an immigrant. Some of the kids wrote poems which talked about the life of being an immigrant and had difficulties assimilating in our society. And then a lot of them actually wrote biographies about somebody in their family who immigrated to the United States and shared their difficulties in being accepted. So it ended up being a very, very meaningful experience for my students. So once they've been immersed in all of these different authentic resources, I had several interpersonal tasks. I mentioned to you earlier that after they had watched the videotape of Peur, when I was teaching, obviously this was before virtual teaching, but I had students sit in table groups and discuss the 9 different ethnic groups that are mentioned, that are shown in the elevator, and why each group is afraid of the other group. And because this was a group of 4, each of the students took 2 of the ethnic groups in the video and talked about who they were afraid of. And then they were also related this to experiences in their own lives. And at that time, I had them recorded on an iPad or a computer. Now I would put them in breakout rooms and figure out some way that I could record them, because I would have want to grade their discussion, obviously. I also had students write on the class blog or on the discussion board about the notion of fear of the other, because that theme comes through in all of the different resources. Why people are afraid of each other. Why are you afraid? Why does fear cause so much racism in the world? And then finally, for the presentational writing task, I gave students a choice. They could write an original poem or song of at least 4 stanzas and then illustrate it, expressing their views on racism. They could write an expository essay they illustrated, explaining their ideas about racism. They could write about a personal experience that they had had dealing with racism and illustrate the events. They could create a collage, a painting, or a graphic art, incorporating words, sentences, and symbols, expressing their ideas about racism. Or they could write a short report on some aspect of racism, illustrating the ideas with cartoons or graphic symbols. I always like to give my students choice in their written presentational projects, because it's a way of them using their own creativity and putting themselves into the process. And obviously I was in a classroom at that time, and all of these beautiful poems and songs and collages were an incredible thing to display around my classroom. Students did amazing work. They really put themselves into these projects, shared personal stories about themselves, about their parents, about their friends. I shared an experience that I had had with my son, who's biracial. It was really a sharing time, because it was a written project, but students really wanted to hear from each other. So they actually read their written or shared their written project with the class. And it was an incredibly moving experience for everybody who participated. And finally, for the presentational oral task, I wanted them obviously to practice for the AP. And at that time, I took them into our language lab, but you could have them do this in Flipgrid. But this was the question that I asked them to answer. Dans toute l'histoire de l'humanité, chacun a une différence parmi les groupes, il y a des actes de discrimination. Pensez aux actes de discrimination que vous connaissez dans la société aujourd'hui et comparez ces événements avec quelques événements dans une culture francophone. So again, they're comparing what they've learned about the Francophone world and what they also have learned about what is happening in our society today, whether it be personally, whether it be something in the United States, whether it be in their own community. And this would be where they could talk about current political events, which obviously is a great practice for the AP exam. And I see that Jane, you're back, so I think my time is up, but so I'm going to get out of my screen here. Does anybody have any questions about my unit or anything that you would like to know? before I give it back to Jane.
There's a question in the chat
Yeah.
about what was the length of time for these tasks over a period of days or weeks?
I would say that this took me about 3 weeks, actually, to do well, because each day we did a different text. And so one day we did Azuz Begag, the literary text, and then another day we did the Reader's Theater. And then I had them spend a day looking at SOS Racisme, the website. And then another day we did the video, the 2 different videos. So that took at least 5-6 days probably. And then I had them do their interpersonal tasks. So probably 2 weeks, I would say, is what I spent on this particular unit. And this was not the only unit, obviously, that we did on diversity in general, but this particular one was on racism and intolerance, and how students react to that particular thing.
And
Anybody
then
else?
someone else asked about rubrics. Do you have rubrics for
Yes,
all of
I do. And I can actually share my rubrics through my Google Drive, and I can put that into the chat later on. Okay, so I think now I need to introduce Janelle, who's going to talk about Francophone children's literature.
Okay, so for those who don't know me, my name is Janelle LaFon-Paquin. I do work with Future Leaders for AATF. I retired 2 years ago from Newport Public Schools, which I was fortunate was a very diverse community. And to add to that, we also had the War College, the Naval War College, which always gave us an abundance of officers from around the world and their families. So that made it really cool. I would say I've gotten into this about teaching diversity through Francophone children's books pretty much recently also. But one of the things I saw was a Facebook page that I have belonged to called Diversify Your Bookshelf. And I believe it will be in my resources at the end. It's Cecile Lane who moderates this, and there are so many books that people submit as possible things to use for diversity. So that's one of the reasons why I started doing this. Okay, so before I go into it, things to consider when choosing a text, and you may have heard Tiffany and Ann mention some of these already. First of all, you want to have authors of all races and ethnicities. Just because a person isn't from that ethnic background doesn't mean they can't write a good book about diversity, and you have to be aware of that. Older and newer texts. Some of the older texts are really good, but you have to watch out because some of the older texts they had portray things that just aren't applicable anymore. So it's a good idea to look at newer texts and see what is available and to pre-read those older ones to see what you can choose that still fits. Reading level, and this applies not only to children's stories, but to any text. You have to make sure that the level of the story is going to be easy for your students to understand. You want them to have a little bit of a challenge, but not so much that they look at it, start it, and close it and say, I can't do this. So you do need a challenge, but you need to be aware of students' reading levels. Grade level. Some of the stories that I have, I'm showing you 2 today, but some of them, they talk about violence. They have language that may be questionable. So you may have to look at those things and pre-read before you consider doing this with your students. The larger diversity lens. And that's what I think mine will add a little bit to what has already been given today. I have a diversity wheel, which I will show you, but you're going to do something in a minute before I even show you that wheel. I want you to be a little bit involved. Stereotypes, I think Tiffany and Ann both mentioned that. You've got to be aware of those stereotypes that crop up. Things that you really don't want your students to be looking at. You don't want them looking through that particular lens. Characters, again, you will see on that diversity wheel. And writing style doesn't just have to be a children's story. It can be any type of story. It could be a comic strip book, anything that will help your students to go through and find things about diversity. So the first question is, what kinds of diversity are you aware of? Type your answers in the chat box. I'll give you 1 minute. I have a stopwatch.
Janelle, would you like one of us to monitor the
Yes,
chat?
I would, please. I was just going to ask. I'm ready to go. Go ahead, Tracy.
I will go ahead and start you off when you're ready.
Go ahead.
Okay, so we have a long list of everything. So economic diversity, socioeconomic diversity, technology, body, racial, religious, diversity of opinion, educational, age, linguistic, disability, gender, nationality, religion, and then it sort of repeated.
Good. Thank you so much. So here we go. Here's a wheel I found from Johns Hopkins. Obviously, Johns Hopkins is very famous recently because they do all the COVID testing by counties. And this one here has quite a few different things, and I believe you pretty much touched on almost every one. If you find this one a little difficult to work with, I did it in a different format, a little easier to see. So we mentioned age, religion, ethnicity, culture, perspective. Any ones we didn't mention that you see, Tracy? He's looking through just to be sure. I think we pretty much covered.
Sexuality was there.
Yeah, I think so.
Race. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Ann. Go ahead, Ann.
Yeah, I think that they're all covered in this. Yeah, I think we covered them all. Yeah.
There's one
Right.
on family makeup. I'm not sure if that connects exactly.
That may go into the one with, it could be gender, it could be anything really.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't know if anyone mentioned education,
Yes.
education level.
Yeah, education.
Yes, right,
That was mentioned, yeah.
right. Okay, so this gives you an idea of the different types of diversity. And I've got to be honest, pretty much when I first started, I've done some research on this. When I first started, the big thing that would always come to my mind was race. That was the big thing. And to find out all these other things are included in it, I think are important for all of us, because when we teach, we have students maybe that represent a lot of what is on this chart, and we may not even be aware of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, we're always looking to use the ACFEL core practices. And of course, this one here will go with authentic resources. I am a big proponent of authentic resources, but I have found when I've been looking up for stories on diversity that there are some that are in English that have been translated, and those may have just as much value if they are teaching a lesson that we can't find elsewhere. I think it's an opportunity for students to see even that there's people in, maybe from the US that are writing about this, and we can use those particular texts. I would definitely go with the authentic ones first, but if I could not find it, I would not be averse to using one that's in translation, just to give a perspective of something maybe I did not already have. Now, this particular chart really struck me. I looked at it and I'm like, I can't believe this was 2015. We're talking 5 years ago. If you total the American Indians, First Nations, and this is books, children's books at that time period, and you take the Latinx group, the Asian Pacifics, Asian Pacific Americans, African Americans, if I did the math correctly, that totals 14.2%. almost as much as stories about animals and trucks.
Mhm.
I mean, that's pretty sad when you think about it. And 73.3% of the books were of white, all white protagonists and characters. If we go to the next one, 3 years later, we see there is some improvement. I believe it came to, and I wrote it for myself, 23% now of the American Indians, the Latinx, the Asian Pacific Islander, that category, the African American. So 23%, we're still not that much off from the animals and other, but at least now we're 50%. So I have not seen anything. I don't know if anyone else has, and please help me if you have. I have not seen anything for 2020. I would be very interested in seeing what those numbers are at this point, because I myself have been able to get quite a few texts that talk about quite a few of the different things that I mentioned and that we pulled together about diversity. So what I'm giving you today are 2 examples. Yes, I chose 2 that have Black characters this time, because the reason I did is because I have books that have just come in and I had no time to work with them. I typed up a list this morning that I can always share with you after, because I did not include it in this, of books I have been able to end up getting. I will tell you that a lot of these are available on Amazon, but it may not be Amazon US. I have some that have come from Amazon in French. That's okay. But I also have some, and it's kind of fun. I have some coming Amazon UK, Amazon France, and yes, I've had to pay a little bit in shipping. But what I do is I wait on Amazon until I have enough from that particular place. There's one called Stars and Stripes on Amazon. And by waiting, you can eliminate part of those shipping fees because they will doing them together. So that's just a suggestion. Before I go into the books also, I'd like to say that if your schools, if you don't have a lot of money in your school, maybe you want to consider a donors, I believe it's called Donors Choose, to see if you could get money. I know one of my colleagues in Massachusetts used that and was able to get some children's books, not necessarily this, but she had gotten some children's books with that, and also maybe a GoFundMe place, or check anyone that has opportunities for language teachers to get some funding for their particular classes. Okay, this particular book, Comme un million de papillons noirs, the name of the author is Laura Nsafou. That's how they pronounce her name. And she, just so you know, a little bit of perspective, she happens to be the writer of this book, and she is Black. The person who did the pictures, Barbara Byrne, is white. And they ended up having the best relationship with this, because if you read the story, and I do have it, that you can listen a little bit to it. If you read it, you're going to find it's very poetic language, which is absolutely beautiful. She got her inspiration, as I told you here, from Toni Morrison's novel, because there was a line in it that talked about her clothes were white, her hair like a million black butterflies asleep on her head. And then if you want to look at topics to discuss, and the pictures, you can tell right from looking at it, they're absolutely beautiful. I mean, just looking at the pictures is a story in itself. And that's an activity that I didn't put on that you can do. It's kind of picture book with words. So you could even show the pictures to your students and have them come up with what they think the story is, rather than reading it to them from the beginning. So they get to visualize in their own mind what they think is going to happen. And the pictures do lend themselves to that very nicely. Now, topics to discuss in this story. There's self-confidence, and I will give you a little summary of the story. There's also beauty, because it's her perception of what's beautiful, Adi, who is the protagonist. Family, because it will involve her mom and her aunts and her brother. Self-care, because her mom will teach her to do things to take care of her hair. Friendship, because there's some little arguments there where the students in her class, some of them bully her. And you could talk about resolving. What can you do to resolve those, I guess, the parts of friendship that don't exist at this particular time. And there's the role of nature, because it talks about her and how she loves flowers and butterflies and all that. The autobiographical connection, the author says, and I do have a Padlet for you at the end with a lot of resources for the story, for both stories, for looking up things about racism, for looking up different themes. I have that at the end. She had the same thing happen to her when she was a child. So in a way, there is that little autobiographical connection. And there is one particular video that I will not have the time to show you, but it's on the Padlet. And the video is of Laura and Safu talking about how she got some other inspiration for this and why it was so important to write the story. I will tell you just a little bit. She talks about les cheveux crépus. And when you go back, les cheveux crépus is like frizzy hair. That was very frowned upon. And she talks about the political ramifications, and I will let you two explore that. She talks about that and how it wasn't accepted and it was considered dirty. And in this story, she's trying to overcome it to show that the little girl's hair is something of beauty that she should be willing to share with others. Now, here's a quick little summary of the story. I was going to say a résumé because I usually do this in French. Okay, so if you look at it, it says Adil loves to ask questions and adores butterflies. When she is at school one day, her classmates make fun of her because her hair is different. She returns home and tells her mother that she hates her hair. However, after talking about it with her aunts and her mother, Adil realizes that her hair is something to care for and to be proud of, that it really is like a million black butterflies. Now, knowing just this, here's your next question. What can you suggest? What question or questions can you suggest based only on this summary? Type it in the chat box. 1 minute to go, starting now.
So Janelle, I'll just go ahead and start reading some of them.
Go ahead, 32 seconds in is good.
Okay. Why is hair so important in our culture? Can you go back to the summary, please? So maybe we could go back to that summary. Why do people judge based on hair? Personal experience of a childhood. Why do places have rules about hair? What makes beauty? Who decides what's beautiful? Question for the students. Sorry, that's, okay. Why do places have rules about hair? What other traits are we judged on? So those are a bunch of really good questions.
Right, okay, good, thank you so much. So this is something for you to keep in mind as we continue with our little story here. So I have come up with some sample activities. Hopefully these will all open. Let me go back here, I skipped. Okay, so I have A/B sheets, and on the slide, I can connect to them, and it also explains how they work. Just so you know, so I don't have to read it then, you give them to students. One student has an A, one student has a B. Both sets of sheets have statements on them. If the statement appears on both sheets, it's considered a true statement. If it does not appear on both sheets, it's considered a false statement. So several things you can do. You can use it as a pre-rating activity. Let me get to it here so you can see. Whoops. Okay, so here's the different things that you can do. You can do it pre-reading, and I'll show you a sample of one.
Comme un million de papillons noirs. Adé aimait ce jardin coloré. Pendant que son grand frère, Lemzo, jouait au ballon avec ses amis, elle apprenait le nom des fleurs par cœur. Elle adorait voir cet arc-en-ciel floral s'étendre devant elle. Le violet des lilas, le blanc des lys et des anastasias, le rouge des tulipes et des coquelicots. Quelle que soit leur odeur ou leur couleur, les papillons se posaient sur leurs pétales ouverts. Quand Lemzo appela « Adé, il faut rentrer !» Adé ne l'entendit pas. Elle regardait les papillons butiner le cœur des fleurs, les uns après les autres, sans fin.
Okay, we can go to the next slide just so that it gives you an idea. This is someone else who is reading it. Someone asked if it was the author. It's someone else who is reading it.
Okay.
Okay, next slide.
Les éclairs au chocolat,
Whoops.
les papillons.
There we go. Okay.
Okay, so this wheel, and again, I'm not going to be able to open this, I bet. But this is a wheel I found. It's a question wheel. And I got it from Wheel of Names. What you do is you take out the names and you can put in questions that go with the story.
Oh,
Okay, so click it and you can spin it.
oh, that's cool.
So what it does is it shows you the question. Now, the only problem is you can't put the answers. So it would be kind of something you could do, even if you had your students online, where you have the questions, they spin the wheel, and then they answer it. You can either remove the question, and then you have one less question in the little wheel, or you can keep it in and just keep spinning. Kids love to play spin the wheel. Okay, so go to the next one. So that's a possibility. Okay, and then I have a choice board that I made. Now, if you click on that, it should give you the choice board and show you some possible activities you can do. So anyway, in that choice board, there are a whole bunch of activities that you can do.
Okay.
And it gives the students the opportunity to choose, and I put for them to choose 3 of them. Okay, this second story, which I will go quickly because I'm probably running out of time. This second story, I gave you a little summary of it, and it's about 2 brothers. This one is written by a French-Canadian professor who actually teaches in Sherbrooke in Canada, in Quebec. I tried to email him to see if he would give me some inspirational points, but he didn't get back to me. So I was hoping I would have that just like I did in the other. So this one is about 2 little brothers. And pretty much you've got a summary there, but the older brother, he wants his younger brother to be able to do what he does. So it's a huge cliff. And what they do is every year they swim and they go up to that big rock. And the older brother always climbs it and he jumps into the water from that cliff. Well, this particular time he looks at his little brother because he knows that it's time. So he has him go. And he does, you know, he finally gets him to jump off the cliff. And it's that encouragement, it's that sense of good feeling that he has with his brother that makes it continue. Okay, we've got to go to the next. So we won't have time for the answer, so let's kind of skip over that one. Okay, so discussion topics. You have brotherhood, fears, because the little brother was afraid, self-confidence, the fact that the older brother makes his younger brother want to do this, his encouragement, and he does a lot with his eyes. He looks at his brother. It's the sweetest thing. This is another one that has poetic language and beautiful images. And then the courage for the little brother to say, yes, I'm going to do this. Next slide. So some sample activities, obviously we won't have time to play Kahoot, but it is there for you. And Kahoot could be used as a pre-reading activity. It doesn't just have to be a during or post activity, because that way it gives students an idea of what they're looking for. I have whiteboard activities, which are on the next page. If you skip to the next slide, well, another one. So you could have them draw something, you can have them write something, comprehension questions to answer, draw an image from the story, true false statements where they hold it up. Okay, go to the next. You can compare it to Mon beau-frère. Now it's not my brother, but it's how it ends up that this brother-in-law ends up becoming like a brother. So I thought it was an interesting comparison you could make with older students. Next slide, because Jane is there peeking. Here's the Padlet with all kinds of activities to do. I mean, the one in the bottom right is the one that has the interview with the author that is absolutely wonderful. Some of the others all have to do with the stories, some a little bit about the authors, some about diversity, some about choosing texts. So I tried to give you as many things as I could. I had them arranged, but they don't arrange well in that particular format. So anyway, you have a lot that you can choose there. Last slide, I believe. And then here, these should all link and they don't click. So these are all possible things that I gave you. Now, the reason I gave you available at the French Cultural Center in Boston isn't because you belong there or because you would have a membership and you could loan their books, but they have a list of 203 books and some films. That's where I found some of mine. You look and find out what the titles, the authors, it will tell you what country they're from. So it's a really good resource to use to find books if that's what you're looking for. And as I mentioned before, I've got the Diversify Your Bookshelf Facebook page linked if anybody's interested, because you would find some things there. Okay, I guess it goes back to Anne, or I could just say Tracy Rucker is up next.
So, as Tiffany mentioned earlier in her presentation, we are going around the world. Okay, so if you guessed Michel Sardou, you are absolutely correct. Okay, as we continue then, I will sort of throw out one question, and I'm not gonna pause and let you have the processing time, but here it is. So that the video that we just watched is a receptive variable that really contributes to acquisition and cultural consistency or cultural knowledge in a really direct way. So my question to you, French teachers, colleagues, is how would you use a video like that to actually tap into cultural competency on a bigger scale? Type that answer into the chat, and throughout my presentation, I'm asking one of my colleagues to sort of just interrupt me at any point, and I will address that question. So, thank you very much. I'm going to continue now with my PowerPoint presentation. All right, so this is called Le Lac du Connemara. And so one of the things that I was trying to accomplish here is to get students to actually interact with vocabulary that is meaningful for them. So you're looking at the goals and the cultural connections that I was making at the bottom there. So number one, the verbs, nouns, adjectives, adverbs, and expressions that you see are not generated by Mr. Rucker. I actually played the song and I said to my French 3 students, create an opportunity for yourself to acquire new words, okay? And I asked them to actually, on a Post-it note, write down verbs, nouns, adjectives, adverbs, and expressions that they heard. However, I gave them the opportunity to choose which of those categories they wanted to look for. I took that list and I added, I just kind of organized it. And this is an ongoing activity for about 2 weeks. And at the bottom, what you actually see are two big questions. Who was Frederick Douglass? And you might think, what is the connection there? Well, there's a huge connection. What was the importance of anti-slavery in terms of Frederick Douglass's visit to Ireland? And why is that an important factor? Well, it deals with interculturality on a really big level. So this song redone by a group called Kids United. The music group really was combined in 2015 very purposefully by UNICEF France to remake and relaunch top French songs that celebrated peace and hope. That is a big hook for students because Michel Sardou from the 1980s played a major role in pop culture because the song itself evokes a multitude of cultural factors: physical landscape, lakes, ethnic groups, habits, daily life. All of these receptive variables really contribute to that incidental learning that we are after in our classrooms. Therefore, here is where I want to set this up. Do the visuals we use in class engage students? Do the visuals that we use in class to engage students reflect them? Number two, how do we connect authentic materials in meaningful ways? And then number three, are we really differentiating content that allows students to develop their own list of meaningful active vocabulary, like I just suggested in the previous slide? The next thing is that humor is important. Take a look at that. And I hope that you are already reacting. Thank you. At least one person is. I heard one person. I'm not seeing your screens right now. So I love humor. I just absolutely think humor plays a major role in our classrooms. We're all French teachers, so no need to translate that phrase. But humor helps reduce that affective filter. So when we post something really small like this, or even just the picture itself, and students start laughing, we are literally hooking them in to an experience that's going to be meaningful for them. This image really deals with two big ideas: ownership and belonging. And you know what, when we think about teaching through a global lens, we are hitting the mark right there. That's what I want to say about that. Okay, I want to talk about some strategies now. So lunch talk is a purposeful strategy that I use to bring in topics about different communities. My approach is actually threefold. Number one, get the students interested in the food that we are planning on eating in our cafeteria on any given day. That is, in fact, our lunch menu during National French Week from last year. And then, wow. Yeah, and so we talk about what we like, what we dislike, why, you know, we talk about what the coq au vin is, what the French onion soup is, what the ingredients are. Okay, that's number one. So I'm asking lots and lots of questions about the foods that they enjoy and that they like. And then they'll start talking about what they eat at home, and they'll start talking about what they eat when they're with their buddies and all that kind of thing. So that's tier one. Tier two is actually deeper. You're gonna bring in the culture by sharing foods from other regions. And I'm a firm believer that it doesn't have to just always be the Francophone world, quite frankly, because we are world language teachers. We're not just focusing on one aspect of our world. So when we talk about interculturality, I'm always bringing in things from other regions and other countries. Okay, so at first, talk about the dish itself. So you're looking at the bottom, that is not my cap. I can't tell if it's my capitaine or not. It doesn't look like my capitaine. It was supposed to have been capitaine, the fish in Senegal that is so popular. But you do in fact have the escargot and the croque monsieur and the coq au vin. All right, so these are different pieces, these are different foods from various regions. And then you can really go into some card talk, not card talk, but geography talk, and talk about where escargots are the most popular. You can talk about the origins of coq au vin. You can talk about Provence, and you can talk about the different foods from that area. If you were looking at the picture of what I thought was there, which was the capitaine, which is a fish that is super popular in Senegal, you talk about that region of the world and the people there. So we have some more on that later. The third tier of lunch talk is that you want to talk about how products vary from region to region. So that is how I approach lunch talk. Okay, so that's a strategy that I use to get a lot of input out. All right, so I'm going to let you take a second to look at that image. Oh mon Dieu, on était cambriolés. Non, les petits enfants sont arrivés. I love that one. I don't know where I found it, but I found it recently. I just love it. It's so great, you know. I want to talk about differentiation here because some students will benefit from from using the manipulatives that you see right here at the top of the screen, composed of sentence starters, rejoinders, and transition words. Students then create their own sentences with those words. So that works for some students. On the other hand, others will benefit from conscious scaffolding that which one easily finds in texts like the one you see there. On était cambriolé? Non, les petits sont arrivés. All right, so you got a lot of past tense in there. You've got some descriptive adjectives. This is really, again, humor tugging at the strings of reality. And so that really matches with really a strong intercultural approach, because many kids are going to be able to react to them going to their grandparents' house and making a big mess, you know? So that's kind of a really neat little picture. Okay, so then I am a firm believer that we have to intentionally integrate opportunities for students at all levels to level up proficiency skills. And I'm taking the phrase level up from Catherine Pousselin, who used that very effectively in her presentations this year. So level up, that means take your proficiency from where it is to the next level. How do you do it? Asking questions. We ask circling questions based on opinion and interpretation of authentic text. And at this point, since I've talked a few minutes, I'm going to take a pause and ask whether there are comments or questions in the chat box that I need to address.
There's a question about, when do you do lunch talk? Is food actually eaten, or are you just whetting their appetite?
You're just kind of getting them excited about lunch, or even if they've had lunch, then you talk about it after lunch, but we don't actually intake the food, no.
Okay, all right, that was the only question that came.
Okay, perfect. So this is, again, just an opportunity to really say, you know, in my opinion, according to me, and these texts that you actually see here, those are on those manipulatives that I shared with you just a few minutes ago. I have large cards of those, and they're laminated so students can actually use them. But going back to the classroom next week, I'm going to actually duplicate my entire set so that students have their individual packets of those rejoinders instead of passing them around. So it's important that we just kind of be aware of that. Okay, so I want to move on to some other strategies. Here is one of my favorite strategies, and it is the scavenger hunt. The scavenger hunt provides students with opportunities to dig into many elements of life in various cultures. What does my scavenger hunt look like? It includes numbered images. Each of those images are numbered, that students match to written passages, which are lettered, A, B, C, D, okay? And they have to, students have to read and interpret the language that is found on in those passages, and they have to match those to the image, okay? So what am I after there? The scavenger hunt moves along receptive variables so that students open up that pathway towards being able to talk about poignant pictures, okay? So the next series of pictures I'm going to show you are in fact poignant. They are going to tug at our heartstrings in a way that I think students have to be aware of. So I'm going to show you two, and then I'm going to make it lighter, and then I'm going to come back to the poignant pictures. Okay. Productive variables. Everybody has gotten caught in a rainstorm. Many of us have been walking on the streets and we needed, you know, another pair of shoes. People will stop and maybe give you your pair of shoes or need something to eat. So what do these pictures actually allow students to do? They allow students to produce material. They allow students to use the language, because language is social. There is no way we can look at these pictures and not feel like something is going on, and it's on a social, emotional level. It taps into that social, emotional feature that can be challenging. To do so, we've got to focus on one strategy, not five, but one, and that is observe and discuss, either in writing or in an interpersonal manner, or both. Observe and discuss what you see. Okay? So that's my first sort of hint into my big topic today. I'm going to make it a little bit lighter. What can kids do? They can produce comic strips, because it is proven that comic strips are popular because science has actually demonstrated the importance of doodling, drawing, and creating comics. They promote personalized learning opportunities for students. So there are two activities you can try next week in your classes. Créer la publicité en français sur un produit imaginaire qui parle de l'environnement. Parler du produit et de ce qu'on fait et comment l'utiliser, d'accord? Discuter en petits groupes. So these are interpersonal exchanges. How do you do it in a digital world? Anne talked about this earlier. Put them in breakout rooms. Students can work in breakout rooms to engage in that topic, all right? So that's not a barrier for us in any way, okay? And the other one, of course, is dessiner et illustrer une bande dessinée sur un sujet de votre choix, all right? All of the other presenters today have talked about the student choice and the importance of that. And here's another example. I'll take a pause just to see if there's anything in the chat that I need to address.
Do you share food with the chemistry teacher at collegiate? Do you ever use audio texts for the pictures is another one.
Do I use audio text?
Audio
Yes.
text for the pictures.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
And can you give an example of a description?
Of a description of?
From the scavenger hunt for the pictures that you use for the scavengers.
Oh, yes, yes. Okay, so I went way too fast on that one, sorry. So I'm gonna talk about one picture in particular. I won't go back to the slide, but let's talk about the picture where Coco Chanel is featured. So so I have the novice and intermediate level descriptions. So for the novice level, the description would be in French. They're all in French. So at the novice level, this is a fashion designer who is featured in a picture with black and white. Okay. The intermediate level would be just a little bit more difficult than that. This fashion designer, was revolutionary during her time. You give the time frame. She is known not only for her fashion, but for her clothes, but she's also known for a variety of colognes and perfumes. So you give a little bit more vocabulary.
Okay.
All right, so I'll continue. This is another one of my favorites. I actually came up with this by myself. I don't know how, but I did. This was many years ago, though. So the question is, how do we get students to own the experience of learning about world cultures? I would love for you to type a response to that in the chat. How do we get students to own the experience of learning about world cultures? So here's my take on it. To provide students with a discovery challenge and a sense of the world, set up regular processing time so students can research 3 ideas about a region of the world that they become interested in. You give them the choice. You don't give them the choice of which region, you just really assign those. So Tracy's gonna have Côte d'Ivoire, Anne's gonna have Benin, Janet's gonna have Quebec, and Tiffany's gonna have Congo, and we all look for things that we are interested in learning more about. And those soft learning experiences really help students develop those soft senses of, okay, other people exist in our bubble. It's not all the ways about me. The world is there. Why? You're giving the students the choice. And the second why, the second part of that why is you're after discovery, okay? That is absolutely it. So Flag It is a really nice activity that I use in all levels of French. Okay, is there anything in the chat there?
No questions, no, just comments, yeah.
Perfect, I'll continue, thank you very much. All right, so this is another one of my favorite activities here. Attaching meaning to others, not just me, tapping into 21st century skills. So when we reflect on society and community, we focus on habits of daily life. Art and photography provide rich input in terms of historical and contemporary context. So French teachers, I'm gonna ask that you attribute a 3-letter title to the picture on my right side, which is the picture of the people eating, okay? A 3-word title to that image. Those are the only directions I'm going to give. Attribute a 3-word title to the image. Okay, and I'm going to actually pause because I would like to see what people write. Don't go Googling it. And Anne, if you see anything pop up, I'll just...
Right, we have a lot of different...
just give me 1 or 2 if you don't mind.
So, on partage tout, food and community, dîner en famille, on aime manger, dîner chez moi, on mange ensemble, are some of the ones that have come up.
That's perfect. So the phrase is manger au bol, but I did that because, you know, we need to teach students a variety of phrases that are associated with pictures like that. So touching images, poignant pictures give us a sense of how we can reflect upon and, when appropriate, improve experiences. Earlier in Anne's presentation, she talked about the story of how Arab students were treated in schools. And that means that pictures reflect experiences, okay? Also, Janelle mentioned, you know, that we need to consider 2 things. We need to be aware of a larger diversity scope, and we need to be aware of relevance of materials, all right? So here are some more poignant pictures. I'm a cat lover, so the one I found here just really tugged at my emotional being. It just tapped into my neurons, and I think I was just so touched by that, because I thought, you know, this is here are 4 little kittens, but what I'm more intrigued about is, what do you not see there? I don't really think you see a mother cat, you know, so you can really think about the deep meaning there. And of course, you might end up in tears, like I would have done if my teacher were making me talk about that picture. So we have to be careful about the pictures that we choose. But touching images tug at that emotionalness of our being. And when we think about multiculturalism, plural realities of cultures, these factors expand throughout our universe. This other picture here, this little kid helping this gentleman off the sidewalk. Oh my goodness. We talk about language. You can really attribute so many different variables there, okay? So I think what I'm saying here is that the use of target language, excuse me, let me back up. We have to use the target language as a source to communicate about everyday situations, and not just learning grammar and vocabulary, but can we get to that point? And to further the conversation, students need to engage in opportunities where they're talking about questions, big topics, tolerance, you know, different movements. Because if you're going to get into the perspectives, we have to dig deeper, and that's important. The next slide gives you 3 additional activities. One is based on something that is a current event. The second activity deals with interacting with native speakers. The third activity is based on a presentation from a video. So those are 3 top activities that students can engage in. Again, students must step up, level up language, and create with a demonstration of learning based on solid examples. And I love what Janelle said, and I'm going to quote her. Looking at the pictures is a story in itself.
Mm-hmm.
Many of us recognize both of these individuals. Perspective, I will admit, I don't remember exactly offhand the year that Charles de Gaulle went to Algeria and said, "Je vous ai compris," all right? But I do remember the rough time period. So when we think about how societies have been impacted by dichotomous systems, having hard conversations in our world language classroom requires 3 big ideas, and I'm almost done. What are my own biases, and through which cultural lenses do I view my own world? So it starts with us. Number 2, how can I intentionally focus on background knowledge of my students to foster an environment that perpetually reflects in various ways shared personal spaces that are relevant. And number 3, how can I focus humor, cultural responsiveness, cognitive processes, and student choice to motivate students to reach out and hold on to global awareness? And that, my wonderful French colleagues, is the end of my presentation, and I want to thank you very much.
Tracy, there was a question about where you find the images, but Janelle answered, gave some links in the chat.
Okay, great, great.
I don't know
Tiffany
if you want to put
did.
any. Tiffany did, sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, if you want to add anything else to the chat about images.
I will just be honest with you. I spend way too much time Googling and Yahooing and trying to find different images.
Yeah.
So I'm actually very appreciative that Tiffany and Janelle have given some links, because I don't actually have various links. I just kind of Google it. I actually have folders that contain just tons and tons of pictures, and they are just pictures from all over the place. And they are not even organized, but I just kind of very quickly look at my closet of pictures, and I pull 4 or 5 for the different units. So thank you.
Well, I think our time is up here, everyone. And I think Jane is coming back on to close out the session. But we want to thank everybody for joining us today. We hope that our resources you will enjoy, and that you will try out some of them in the next coming weeks, and that this has been helpful for you in terms of thinking about how you're going to diversify your curriculum.
Someone just asked a question about this. The chat and the presentations, PowerPoints, will be posted later this afternoon, and the video will be posted within a few days as soon as my editor gets it done. The video will go on the AATF YouTube channel, which is AAT French.
Oh, okay.
And the links the link is at the bottom of the invitation, of the Zoom invitation. There's a link to a folder, and they're also on our webinar and online resources page on the website. So there are lots of different places where you can find them. So thank you to everybody for these wonderful presentations.
Thank you.
Sorry to interrupt you, Anne. Go ahead.
No, just thank you to everybody for participating. I hope you all enjoyed it and you found it useful. So,
yeah.
And I would like to thank Anne and Jane for the work that they have done to absolutely continue with providing rich professional development opportunities such as this one. They have put a whole lot of work into this, and I know that my colleagues join me in applauding you very, very graciously. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And hopefully you'll be getting your September bulletin soon because it's our inaugural diversity issue, and we're really looking forward to it. So thank you again, everybody.
Yes, someone asked about the certificates of participation. Just email a screenshot to staff@frenchteachers.org, and we'll send you a certificate. And the bulletins, of course, I guess we should have used it to test the speed of the post office.
Yeah. But maybe you'll get the September bulletin in October. This is what we're hoping. Okay, goodbye, everybody. Enjoy your Saturdays. Okay.
Thank you.
Take care. Au revoir.
Thank you.